Hi, welcome back to the podcast School of Love, where we want to help you create parent-child relationships where you can talk about anything, especially about sex. In this episode, I get to interview Kristen Miele, creator of Sex Ed Reclaimed. She's a mother of two, a Christian, and works in sexual education. She talks about her story, why she made this course, which is basically teaching kids about sex with a Christian perspective. She started working 15 years ago in teaching sexual education, first feeling very uncomfortable about it. And she took this to God, and God revealed to her that He didn't want this to be so uncomfortable. It's meant to be a wonderful gift to human beings. And going more and more deeper into God's perspective, she took this mission of sharing that perspective with other families, specifically with children. I just love this episode and being able to meet Kristen, because this conversation, she talks about how important it is to involve our faith into learning about such important things like sex and really embracing these conversations instead of shoving them away. She came from that kind of culture, but she recognized that wasn't right, and she's doing her best to change it. And so what can we learn from that? There is so much to learn, and I hope you enjoyed this episode where we talk about that. So welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Kristen Miele from Sex Ed Reclaimed, and I'm so grateful to have you here, Kristen. And could you explain what you do for our audience?
Of course, yes. Well, thank you for having me, Amelia. I'm always excited to connect with more parents and people who are trying to live in this place, this home that we have, but also be different than the world and figure out how to swim against the grain in that way. I own Sex Ed Reclaimed, which is a company strictly seeking to educate children on sexuality, sex, dating, puberty, um, any topics related to that umbrella term of sex ed is really what I seek to educate on. And I specifically have a digital library for kids to utilize so that they can experience sex ed, but they could experience it potentially right at home or in their church youth group or even in a health classroom or a faith-based health classroom. And that will help them to understand this topic from a biblical perspective, which a lot of us didn't get as young people. And so we are seeking that out for our own children.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. And how did you start this whole project, this whole journey?
I began in this journey as a graduate student. I was studying public health, and really the Lord led me to teach the course itself. I was assigned to teach a course called Human Sexuality, and that course was terrifying to me. I did not know how to talk about the topic. I was very scared to teach undergrads, as I was a recent graduate myself. And I began teaching, felt discomfort, and really realized that the church had never built me up to be able to talk about this topic well. And so I thought it was a dark, evil topic. But in reality, after a semester of teaching at university, I had a realization from the Lord during conversation with him, I guess, around, hey, I don't want to teach this topic. Like, it's dark. I don't like that I was assigned it. And God was totally dismantling that. No, it's not dark. It's mine. I created it. Why are you so afraid of this topic? This is my good gift to people. But of course, I know that people are sinful and that we've made things our own, and that includes sex. And so we see the devastation of that around us all the time. And I began my sex ed journey really there, and I never stopped. There was a few different times I tried to almost get away from sex ed and do my own thing, in public health separate, but the Lord kept calling me back to sex ed. I was an overseas missionary for several years, didn't think I would be doing sex ed overseas, and once people found out that I had that skill set, they did want me to teach the topic. And so I ended up doing it overseas as well. And I've taught in many, many, many classrooms since my graduate experience in the early 2010s.
Yeah, wow. That's really great. I'm glad God called you. because yeah, I mean there's so much, opinions going on out there, and I feel like yeah, a lot of it, like you said, growing up in faith, a lot of this education didn't exist in churches or church communities or even in families. It really just depended, yeah, on the family's level of openness.
Hmm.
Most of us didn't feel so open, generally speaking, is my impression. Yeah, so I'm also just wondering, how did you build? I saw your curriculum and it's really great. I got the sample videos. I was listening with my son, who is
Oh, good.
7,
Okay.
and yeah, how did you build this, which feels so informative and confident? I would say almost from nothing, right? Because
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know if you would you agree it's you built it up from nothing, or yeah, how did you do that?
Yeah. Well, I did. I mean, I began this company. So I had a vision for it. I came off the mission field, which I mentioned. I was on the mission field. So I came off. I was really grieving that because it was a sudden leaving. It was not a planned. And so I had returned to the States for a training, and then we never went back. And that was really difficult for me. And so I was praying about that. And the Lord gave me this vision for Sex Ed Reclaimed, like one of the very few visions I've had in my life. And I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't trying to start it. I wasn't interested in being an entrepreneur or owning a business, but it just made so much sense. It was basically this vision of everything you've ever taught to students, videotape that and put that online so that people can access it. My community, like my children can access that. And as someone ignored it at first, I started to make just a basic sex ed course that would be fine for anyone, very scientific based, no mention of anything related to God. And then, of course, quickly I felt convicted of, no, I can't do that. God gave me this vision. And so by the time I set it live, which was a year after that original vision, I had all of this video content for kids. And really, honestly, the Holy Spirit directed me towards the content. I wrote down everything I'd taught and made that a video with some friends who do filming and editing and website design. And then I kept being led to more topics. Like I specifically remember one, why do I like attention? I had never taught on that in a sex ed class. That doesn't seem overtly sexual health education to me, but it came to me as kind of this idea of like you need to talk about why we enjoy being known, even to little kids, and why we want to be known, and how that's a godly desire to be seen and loved and known, but it can warp into some bad circumstances and some chosen sin paths, which aren't good for us, some sinful paths. And so I began to really just listen to the Holy Spirit whenever I felt convicted of making more content, creating more videos for kids. It simply just added to those digital libraries, but I knew pretty quickly that it had to be in two different age groups. I have daughters who are very young, and so my first curriculum is for 3 to 6 year olds. That's not where everybody has to start. It's for toddlers and young learners. And then I made a curriculum for young elementary learners, like 7 to 10 year olds, and then preteens and teenagers. And I had never seen during my market research time any company that was doing that. Everybody who was doing any sort of Christian sex ed was basically directed towards adults, or it was a sexuality and identity course, maybe a brief 3 to 5 video course for older kids, maybe something for younger kids on how God made me, but it was never like very comprehensive and very full, and also focused on sexually transmitted infections and consent and God's design for sex and His purpose for marriage and how to say no. Like it was never what I wanted it to be. And so that was part of, okay, God gave me this vision, but now I really want to create this. I want to fill this gap in the marketplace or in the Christian community so that Christians have access to good sex ed that is scientific, but it also talks about God's goodness and His design in it. And that is a certain niche of people, but there's a lot of people who are in that niche, praise the Lord, who do want to teach their kids, but they also don't want to leave out their faith, and they don't want it to just be their faith. They also want it to look at statistics and realities of the world around us, because some of the feedback I get is, hey, you talk about abortion And you don't just say abortion is wrong. You like talk about what it is and why people might get it. And so we can't support that. And it's like, oh wow, okay, well then you're probably not my customer or my people, so to speak, in this moment, because I do talk about the complexities of abortions. And yes, with kids, but it's not simply just, hey, this is killing the unborn. It is, why do people seek it out? Why do Christians get abortions? What can we do to help those people? How could we meet that gap or that need for people? And I really like that kind of discussion with children, and I like leaving that space open for them to start forming their worldview and also really reflect back with their parents, ideally, on those topics. Like, what do we believe, but why?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Also, my work has all been about how can we invite these open conversations at
Right.
home. And yeah, one question that comes up a lot is, yeah, when do we start these conversations? Parents ask, like, okay, what's the age group for this conversation? And I mean, I think it is very individual for each family. And yeah, one thing that I also am learning myself is just openness in general, that we need to learn that. And of course, telling the truth and not shying
Yes.
away from questions. But do you have any advice for parents who, yeah, who want to start having these open conversations, like any kind of age group or general level of understanding to just approach the conversation of sex?
Well, I like what you mentioned, that we have to be honest and we have to be open. I mean, when we look at Christ, we see that he was honest with people. He told them the truth, but he remained kind and loving and interested in them. He also didn't sugarcoat things. And so I approach sex ed really the same way. There is a way to be perfectly honest with kids, like totally honest, and yet keep it age appropriate. So a very practical example of this might be that you have a 5-year-old who asked where babies come from. Where do babies come from? And instead of freaking out or saying, well, that's not for you to know, or we're not going to talk about that, or where did you hear that? That you shouldn't be asking that, anything like that, which is not how the Lord would respond to our questions, and he doesn't. You might say, oh, that's a great question. What do you mean? And that's a really practical first step to figure out what they're asking, because sometimes a kid asks what sex is and he means or she means their biological sex. Maybe they're filling out a form and they just need to know male or female and they didn't realize that that's what this paper is asking. So you don't want to go into describing the act of sex to a child who's simply asking what their biological sex is. Similarly, I had a mom the other day, well, recently tell me that her son in the car asked what boobies were. And she was about to launch into this big conversation on slang terms and respect for women and these types of things. But then she started with, what do you mean? And he said, well, somebody mentioned booby traps, and I don't know what those are. And so that was an entirely different conversation, right? So really starting with, what do you mean? And that readies yourself and readies this child to figure out what they're asking and get into it. But going with my earlier example, so a child says, where do babies come from? To a little kid, you might say babies come from sperm, which are from men, and eggs, which are from women. And once they're combined, they make a baby. And that baby grows in the uterus. And that's what happens when a woman is pregnant. And they might be like, oh, and then they're off to play, right? Or they might say, okay, but how does a sperm get to an egg? And you could say, oh, it swims. Okay, where are sperm? Oh, they're in the man's body, right? So it's very simple, step by step, being honest. And if a 13-year-old, on the other hand, is asking that, you are pretty clearly going to say, well, a baby is made from sperm and an egg. The sperm enters the uterus through the act of sex, right? So the penis enters the vagina, and sperm leave his body. They swim towards an egg. You could talk about ovulation at that point. Particularly, I would say if you have a young girl asking, like, it would be great to talk about periods and menstrual cycles and how those actually create pregnancy or help to create a pregnancy, which is really cool. You're always wanting to answer honestly and scientifically, but really get at their level, like step by step, what are they asking? Because if you're not going to answer them, if you're not going to tell them what the answer to their question is, whatever that might be, then they are going to look elsewhere. And dually, they're going to learn that you are not a safe space for those kinds of questions. And so they'll just ask their friends, or they'll just ask their internet device, whatever devices they have access to. And that's going to be a terrible place for them to start finding out about sex and sexuality and dating and their body. That's not where you want them to go. And so even if you feel some discomfort in answering questions they have, um, it's better that you answer them, because this is where they're asking for the information to come from, which is a huge blessing, right? When people ask the Lord questions, he answered because he loved them, because he wanted them to know the truth, and because they were asking. Like, he responds to our faith and our curiosity. And I find that really beautiful. And so if we can model that, even when we talk about this topic, it's great. And the great thing is if you have little kids, they don't really care about shame or discomfort, because they're not there yet. They haven't learned those things yet. And so they are simply just trying to find out and move along with their day, and it doesn't bother them. Whereas I have had real experiences with young teens or preteens who, I mean, they will cry when you tell them information. And it's not because the information is bad. It's because they've been lied to and they're embarrassed about it, like thinking babies came from storks. I had a girl once who was just kind of quietly crying when I was talking about pregnancy, and it's like, oh my gosh, why is this girl crying? What's going on with her? And I went to her after class, because I was teaching in a classroom. She said she was sad that her parents had told her that babies came from storks, because she never knew any different, and she realized none of her classmates believed that either. So she just felt dumb. And I'm sure I told her, your parents didn't want to lie to you. They were probably trying to protect you. They probably thought that you didn't need the information yet. But I mean, she didn't really care. She was really hyper focused in that moment on the fact that she didn't know where babies came from, and she was in 7th grade. And so, being honest with your kids is a great first step to them feeling less shame around this, and also seeking the truth out from a good source, which is you.
Yeah, and I also love how you kind of keep referring to, like, if I ask God, the Lord, if I ask the same question, how would God answer me? And then kind of put that into my own parenting. I love that. Like, God would be honest. God would, give scientific answers, or, get down to the understanding level of the child or myself. I also don't understand everything, about the world, and would answer me in that way. So I love that as a kind of guideline. Yeah.
Yes. And you mentioned, Amelia, too, that even if you don't know the answer, that's fine, right? Telling a child, I don't know, that's a great question. Let me get back to you. But then actually getting back to them, or saying, you know what, we could probably look up some answers together. Let me go look at this and then we'll talk about it. Or, you know what, we're at dinner right now, but and your little cousins are here, and we're not going to talk about it at the table, but I will talk to you about that after. Maybe sometimes there is a, inappropriate place that you don't feel that conversation can happen, or you're just not ready for it, to be frank, and you return to it. And that's okay too, because it's still portraying to them that you care about their question, you do want to talk about it, and you will. And so I do think that that is the best response, even in our own potential discomfort. So it's much better than creating silly metaphors and flowery language around a question they have, which can just make them more confused. And also recognize later on that you're not the best source of information, because you were, lying, even though that wasn't your intent.
Yeah, and you also mentioned, like, a lot of parents might feel embarrassed about talking about a lot of these things. And yeah, not only embarrassment, I've heard from some parents that they, like, maybe they know logically, like, even from their faith, that this is God designed, sex is good, but still struggle very much when, talking about that to their kids, and even, in a positive light. And so, they don't see this conversation really as a light thing. It's really just a big struggle. So I'm just wondering if you, I'm sure you've been confronted with this kind of thing, and if you have anything to say to parents who just really feel so heavy about this topic, but they want it to be good for their kids. They want to pass on a good message, but how can they move past these just heavy burdens that are keeping them from having light conversations?
Sure. That's a great question. Well, I think if they have a heavy burden related to this topic, they really need to discern and consider why. Because some parents will have a heavy burden because they've experienced something in their past that is really heavy, or even a current situation. I will have parents who come to talks I do on pornography, and we'll ask things along the lines of, well, if we're struggling with porn, how could we talk to them about porn? And the biggest thing that you need to know is that, well, you're still the best person to talk to them about this, even if you've had your own struggles. And actually, there is a time and a place for you to share that you've struggled with it too. If a father, let's say, has struggled with porn, or a mother has struggled with porn, and their older child and them are talking about it, it is okay for that parent to say, you know what, I've actually struggled with this before. I was very curious and I didn't have anybody to talk to. And I started watching things that actually scared me or I didn't really like, but I couldn't stop myself. I was so interested, and this is what that's done to my life. However that pans out, I do think you're able to share with older children a bit of your testimony and your story in that, but ideally only if you've resolved it. Because that way you can talk about what God has really done or has been doing in it. And the way that that happens is you have to go through it, right? You have to seek out the counseling or the accountability group or the porn recovery app, betrayal ministry, whatever it is that you're needing, because you want to first figure out your own stuff before you're really getting into the weeds with your kids. And it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect and all set before you start, but it is beneficial for you as an adult to figure out what your burdens are related to this topic and how God can speak into those. Because once you put them in the light, that is where God does all the work and the healing. And it's so beautiful. But if they're still in the dark, then there's going to be a lot of mold. I'm going to just put it that way. A lot of mold growing on it, right? It's just going to fester and it's going to be yucky because you haven't been able to confess it or get it out there or talk about it or receive healing from whatever it was. So that would be the first step. If somebody has a heavy burden for that reason. If somebody has a heavy burden simply because they haven't seen it done well before, that is really where my resource can come in and other resources. That's where the idea that it takes a village, it takes fellowship and community to raise children is very true. Leaning on other people who can do this and know how to do this, or even asking friends who you respect, how did you do this with your kids? What went well and what didn't? Is great. Maybe you have a relationship with a pastor who did this well or didn't, but will share with you why or why not. And I think that's another great step you can take if you're nervous or scared to do this. So getting resources, getting curriculum, sure, but also talking to friends and family who you think did this well. And then lastly, I would say, remember that your kids do not share that burden. Just because you have that burden does not mean your child does. I recently had a mother ask me if she should talk about abortion with her kid because her kid's 8 and she didn't want to burden her with it. I think she even used that word. And I said, your child does not have that burden though. You have that burden because abortion is a heavy topic and you think about all the political ramifications and maybe you know somebody or you've heard a terrible story or even a beautiful story, and you don't know how to communicate all of that. That's fine. Your daughter doesn't need to know all of that. She's simply asking you what abortion is. And so you have to answer her because she's not carrying these heavy burdens that we are. And you, by simply describing it, are not passing that burden on to her. So either way, she's going to come across what it is and why people, get them and how difficult the topic is and what that means for politics. But that's not something that she's asking right now. She's simply asking what it is. So focus on their questions in the moment and answer them step by step, as I said earlier, but also do your own healing and get your own therapy and counseling. I mean, my husband is a physician. I'm a sex ed teacher. We've been married for 13 years. And we still, in recent years, had to go to respective counselors and kind of discuss things from our own past, things we learned in our childhood or didn't learn and how those impact us now and impact our marriage. And that's created so much intimacy and joy. It's not just this big hurdle of, oh, shoot, I have all this stuff in my past I have to deal with. It's like, no, it's a beautiful opportunity to have intimacy with God and with each other. So it's a great benefit of being open about this topic, actually.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think, there's the issue of having to deal with porn, but also any kind of trauma or sexual abuse, maybe, or even just, yeah, lots of shame or inexperience. So I think, yeah, that's just great to hear. Also, that it can be a joy to unpack that trauma. Yeah, that's really great. And I like how you keep coming back to kids don't have all of this burden, right? Like basically they're taught that
Yeah.
from someone. I mean, either their parents or society or peers. And so I've just learned this in the past year, you know, it's great to start this conversation early and of course age appropriately, but yeah, before all of this, all these concepts enter our child's world. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And even if your kids are no longer young, it's still a great time to start. Just recognize that, hey, I know you're 14, I know you're 16, and we've never talked about this, but I actually really want to. And that, again, that's another opportunity for you to share about your past. I never had this. I really wondered. I went to the wrong places for information. I don't want this to happen to you. Or by your age, I had experienced this thing. You know, if you feel okay sharing that, then anything that will recognize the elephant in the room, metaphorically, to say, I haven't done this, but I want to, and I'm here for you in this. And that's a great place to start too, if you haven't yet.
Yeah. Yeah, what would you say? Because, you know, there are a lot of unwanted habits that like parents don't want their kids to have, especially in the area of sexuality. And, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, as parents can use fear-based methods to get our kids to not do these things, you know, whether it's porn or masturbation or who knows, there's so many other habits as well that are just unhealthy, right? And yeah, I'm just wondering if you have seen or experienced how this sort of fear-based steering plays out in the future. Yeah, have you seen any of that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, that's a really good point. In public health in general, there is this issue of fear-based teaching and fear-based education. It it can work, but it typically doesn't. So, for example, if I'm in a health class in my teen years and they're teaching me about drinking and why I have to avoid drinking alcohol. And so they show me a car that's been in an absolutely horrible wreck and they say, this was a drunk driver. Look at this terrible car, right? That is fear-based teaching. And so it freaks you out because, oh my gosh, that car looks terrible and this person maybe died in it or they killed somebody. And that can work for some people, kind of depending on personality and background and that kind of thing. But for most people, that doesn't work. Why? Because it doesn't get at any of the root issues as to why people drink or why they drink and drive. It doesn't actually communicate what do you do if you're out drinking and you need to get home, or what are your options, or what if you have nobody who you can trust around you, or you don't know how to make a call to get a driver, or why are you drinking so heavily? What are the root causes of that? It doesn't even touch that kind of thing. And that's where the real issue lies, is what is driving you to drink so much that, you're not able to drive, or utilize some sort of service to help you. Similarly, around sex, one of the ways people teach fear-based sex ed is they show pictures of sexually transmitted diseases and say, look how disgusting and horrible these are. You don't want that to happen to your penis or vagina, do you? And then that's it. And again, it can work for the occasional person, but the vast majority, 99% of the people, it's not going to do anything for, because it doesn't touch on why people have unprotected sex or sex when they're young or hook up, or touches on abuse or what happens if somebody violates you and you get these STDs. It just others people, if that makes sense. It makes them other. And it also compartmentalizes our choices from our behaviors. So it's not effective education. And that's why I'm a big fan of comprehensive sexual health education that gets at the roots and the behaviors and the desires. So overall, what I would say about fear-based teaching is that it really doesn't work. That there are tactics about it that I can appreciate. The reality of a drunk driver is sometimes that somebody dies, or that they're, at the very least, their car is absolutely totaled and wrecked. Their insurance goes up, right? Like, these are the practicalities depending on the driver and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, we have to get at why people drink, why people have um, sexual intercourse before they're married, to really have an effective and open and engaging conversation with the people in our life about their behaviors and the desires that lead them to those. And that also then normalizes the desires, right? If you hear, for example, I'll tell you something I just saw today. There was a post I saw with a very popular pastor in the States, okay? But he fell from grace. He had an affair. Well, he's back out there. He has a podcast now. And he was interviewing a previous porn star. And the porn star was talking about suicidal ideations, how awful the business was, and then how he became a believer and left that world. Somebody commented about how most husbands struggle with porn. And someone else commented in response saying, I don't even want to think about that. I can't even believe most men would seriously struggle with porn when they're married. Like, why? That's ridiculous. And granted, I'm adding my tone to that. But the thing that comment does is it doesn't recognize reality. The reality is that most people, not just men, struggle with an interest in porn, if not actively watching porn themselves. Statistics tell us this. Friends will tell you this. If people are being honest about their testimonies, they will tell you this. And if we recognize that, then we can move into a space where we say, okay, now how do we fight this? What do we do to fight this evil industry and its impact on our own lives and marriages and children? But if we just blind ourselves to, no, I don't believe that that's happening, or that people would actually be interested, or that people would actually do that, well, then you're not going to have an effective response. So hopefully you can see how that relates to your question. I know it seems a little bit out there, but a fear-based tactic doesn't recognize the normalcy of being interested in the thing that they're talking about, whether it's drinking or a drug or sex. Whereas an effective educational method is to meet people where they are, recognize the reality of temptations, and delve into the why and how to fight those.
Yeah, like what you said, meet people where they are and delve into the why. Yeah, I really think, especially no matter who it is, whether it's an adult or a child, right? They really need that understanding and also that bond, right? That's usually
Yes.
probably a link to what's missing, is a bond with someone. Yeah, and so they just need the presence of some really loving person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so, yeah, many of us might have started this conversation around sex with fear. But yeah, how can that dynamic be changed? Is that, yeah, how can we like take that back, or kind of just have a new start into this conversation? Because it might be there is then already fear put into the child or a teenager. Yeah, like what if we recognize as a parent, okay, this, like saying, okay, you're going to go to hell if you do this, or mommy and daddy really don't like it if you do that. Yeah, how can we start anew and be like, okay, I want to start over with my kid, I want to kind of redo the sex ed?
Sure. I think that's great, first of all. One thing I didn't mention earlier when we were talking about potential parental barriers to talking is, well, I didn't explicitly say it, is that you need to pray. You really should be praying about what's keeping you back. For example, I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast that I had taught human sexuality, but I really struggled to, because I thought it was evil. And then I had this prayer time where God was like, no, it's mine. It's not evil at all. Right. But I had learned that because nobody had ever talked to me in the church about sex, really. And my parents hadn't either, as great as they are. So I thought sex was evil. So praying about what things you've learned, or learned by not learning, and how those are lies. Like, Lord, help me to discern what lies I'm believing about this topic and talking to my kids. And Lord, help me to see how you care about it and what you want me to say to them, and to discern, like to have that Holy Spirit moment of, oh my goodness, my kid has asked me something. This is it. I need to respond. Or we both just heard that song and that song was very explicit. I need to say, hey, did you hear in that song that they said this? What do you think about that? Right? Whatever it is, maybe you come across, maybe you're on a vacation, or there's a nude beach, and people have all different perspectives on that, but in your family you view nudity as an intimate thing, and so you do want to talk to your kid about that. Now, maybe that's happened in the past, maybe it happens right in the present, but either way, going back and saying, hey, did you see this? And can we talk about that for a minute? I really want to have a conversation with you about why we believe XYZ, right? So pray about it, discern with the Holy Spirit, get in a habit of doing so, and then again, acknowledge the elephants in the room. Hey, I said this to you before, or your dad said this and he wants to actually talk to you again about that because it's really important. Or we mentioned earlier that abortions are murder and that is satanic. And actually, that probably wasn't enough information about really why people require abortions. And we actually want to talk about that. Is that okay? And so, really, just opening up that space again, apologizing if needed, and discerning from the Holy Spirit, praying about what's next, talking to your spouse, right? How can we handle this? What can we do better? I know parents that journal about this topic. They prefer journaling to the Lord. That's great too. I do that as well. And then approaching it from there. But you really have to recognize where you messed up and move on. Like, yeah, none of us are perfect parents. We will mess up, and that's okay. It's expected. But we have to acknowledge that we did mess up and we can move forward with new grace and renewed vision and start anew. Thanks to what the Lord does.
Yeah, I think any child would appreciate that, honestly.
Mm.
Instead of like say, oh, my parents messed up, I think they would really appreciate that vulnerability and then also the reconnection on the topic of whatever interest that they shared. Yeah, I see that like a lot of potential in that, and I think I would love if my parents would come to me in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that. I really would echo everything you said. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, I'm just really grateful for your message. And I really believe in families taking on these conversations. Yeah, I just started a year ago with my own kids, and I just kind of see, little blossoms of opportunity, in conversation. And I'm just grateful that, yeah, I didn't have so many visions like you said you did. I think that sounds so amazing. But just a feeling that God wants sexuality back,
Yes.
and because it's God's design, and it's been so misused in this world, and so I just see so much potential in parents giving that message to kids, and especially in areas of sexual abuse. I feel like if parents can really educate their kids early, I believe so much pain can be avoided.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have seen the fruits of your labor, like you've been doing this for a long time. And yeah, have you seen somehow, yeah, any kind of, yeah, because this is just so new for me. Yeah, I just see 1 year view. But yeah, how has it been for you?
Interesting question. I haven't ever actually been asked on a podcast if I've seen the fruits of my labor. And I don't know when and how that will happen. I guess I'm not so concerned with knowing the fruits of my labor as much as knowing that there are, right? Um, I know that God will produce fruit from this because he distinctly led me to this field 15 years ago, and he has led me back when I walked away from it. And he led me to Sex Ed Reclaimed. It is his business, and I am just like his servant, answering the call. And I always want him to be in charge of it, even if that sounds really corny as I say it, but it's true. I really want him to be Lord over that. Um, I have people message me. Sometimes people email me or message me, not super often, but hey, this is basically what has happened because my kid is using your curriculum. I had an email actually that brings to mind. I kind of forgot about this, but a woman in Australia had started using my curriculum with her 4-year-old, and her daughter went to some sort of childcare preschool. I'm not sure exactly, but a co-ed little classroom, and a boy touched her inappropriately, like over her clothing. And she immediately went to the teacher and was like, this boy touched my vulva outside of my clothing, but it was not okay. And anyway, the teacher was so impressed that she immediately went and did that at such a young age that she emailed the mom. told her everything. So she, before she even saw her that day. And then the mom emailed me what the teacher emailed. And I was like, oh, that's so lovely. Because even though it's this, maybe kind of silly thing this little boy did, maybe he didn't think anything of it. Maybe he did. I don't know. The point is that she was already on the defense about that and knew that she could say something and that there would be justice in that moment for her. And that in itself is just really protective against abuse as kids grow. And so I haven't totally seen like the fruits of my labor, so to speak, but I do see things with my own kids, which is great. And that's what I want for other parents. And I do occasionally get a really sweet testimonial about how ultimately what this does is it opens up conversation in the home because parents are playing this for their kids. And so their kids see the video content and then ask their parents things, right? If my mom's showing me this, surely she knows all of this already kind of mentality. And that's really precious and what I want. So, yeah, I think what's more important is just I can't control like other people, right? But I can control my response to God, and my response was yes. And so that is where I'll see the most fruits is just in my own life. And that's really what I hope for parents too, as they say yes to this conversation, is that they see the fruits of their labor in their own family. And I'm honestly positive that they will. So.
Yeah, me too. I think so for sure. I mean, like the example you shared, I feel like is a really strong example of how just kids can learn to protect themselves because they're just already so clear, and
Yeah.
they're not ashamed to say the facts.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's really great and gives a lot of hope. Yeah, one thing I just saw you mentioned in your content is that I don't know if I get the wording exactly right, but that we need to disciple our kids, I
Mm-hmm.
think, in sexual morals.
Yeah.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
do you mean by that?
Well, I had been to a conference of a Christian sexuality conference, and they kind of coined this term sexual discipleship. And I think they might have trademarked it. So it's an organization called Authentic Intimacy. I'm not sure if they did or not, but I thought they did. Anyway, point being is that we disciple our kids in all of these avenues of life, right? We want them to walk in God's ways. We want them to see us do the same. We want to teach them and fellowship with them over life, over the course of life, and lead them. Well, you have to lead them in this way too. You have to lead them sexually. What is their sexual worldview? What are they learning? There's so many people who leave the church. They walk away from the church permanently because their church, including their Christian parents, never talked to them about these topics. And the world then got the chance to totally disciple them in terms of any, honestly, issues related to sex and sexuality. And that is not what Christian parents want. But if you don't disciple them on it, then, what do you expect? And that's what I see, at least in my generation in particular, is so many people have walked away from the church because nobody was talking to them about struggles with being gay or their porn usage or how to have a healthy sex life in their marriage. And so they just figured, oh, this isn't important to the church. It's not important to then God. I don't need it, right? Because I can find this information elsewhere, just as little kids will do too. So it is really important to disciple your kids in the arena of sexuality too.
Yeah, I like that term as well, just because I also realize that, yeah, not only do I want my child to hopefully follow, God's sexual morals,
Yeah.
but also there is such a strong culture and world around them that is pulling them in other directions that lead to pain, I believe, and so I feel like disciple somehow for me it makes it sound like they do need to be strong and yeah, I also really feel that's why us parents need to be there for our kids is because this like we are countering such a strong culture, out there. Like pornography itself, it's such a strong pull that we need to counteract in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I really like this being open about it and giving our kids tools and then just being there present to support them. So, yeah, thank you so much for what you're doing and for telling us about it, Kristen. I also want to ask if you can tell parents who are listening where they can find you and find your courses.
Sure. Thank you, Amelia. I really appreciate this conversation, this discourse, and I hope that more parents are having it. And I'm glad to get to share this messaging with your listeners and your community. I can best be found on my website, sexedreclaimed.com. Additionally, my Instagram is really active as well, and I'm on that probably every day at some point. So that is also Sex Ed Reclaimed. I have a TikTok and I have a LinkedIn with my name, but those former two options are the best to reach out. And then additionally, my website has free samples. You mentioned you got a sample earlier. It has free samples for kids under 10 and kids older than 10 to really let the parents see a little glimpse into what the video content is like. But every curriculum comes with a full workbook. It comes with parent videos. It comes with, depending on the curriculum, it can be up to 30 hours of sex ed content. That's not meant to overwhelm you when I say that. It's just meant to say there's a lot of options to watch as things come up, or if you want to follow a schedule, I have calendars in there of the order to watch things in, and there's grading rubrics. So it really can be used in all sorts of different ways, but it never expires and you don't have to pay for it again. It's just a one-time fee. So access to all of that is right on the website.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out. And yeah, thank you so much, Kristen. I hope I can have you on again sometime soon.
Oh, thank you, Amelia. I would love to.
All the best. Spread the word and stay connected through YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and our newsletter, which you can subscribe to on our website, schooloflove.org. Really hope to hear from you.